Hey everybody, the Darkin lore is being expanded. Several new Darkin are being added into the lore of Runeterra, and I figured it was time to make a video getting you all up to date with the new lore, the new story that's unfolding, because this is a very interesting story that several of you who like Aatrox are going to be very interested in. Without further ado, let's begin. We're gonna have to first tell you guys about Xolaani. Seen here visually for the first time within Bard's art in Legends of Runeterra is Xolaani. Xolaani is a new Darkin being introduced into the lore, who as an Ascended was one of the most powerful healers. She is retained being an extremely powerful mage, and as a counterpart to Aatrox is the most powerful mage, while Aatrox is the most powerful warrior. However, by using her magical talents and corrupted healing, she might actually be now the most powerful Darkin. Pay attention to the fact that Bard sees Xolaani in his portal here, because that's going to be relevant later. Xolaani was first mentioned in the story Poetry with a Blade, but was only later named in the story the Faceless God. She doesn't come out of nowhere, and in fact within the League of Legends lore has been hinted in the background for quite some time. This is when the new lore really starts to begin. Xolaani was imprisoned within Mistfall, which is Master Yi's temple headquarters thing that I'm not going to get too into right now. Master Yi's card reads, Master Yi's mind drifted to the Darkin weapon. Ever since its discovery, he'd been troubled by a terrible sense of foreboding. Some of his students had taken a keen interest, too keen, so he had the curved blades placed under guard deep within the temple. With some effort, he pushed those thoughts from his mind and continued his meditation. Passing on the teachings of Wuju was all that mattered, and June showed great promise. So we learn a few things from this. 1. Master Yi found out that he had a Darkin weapon hidden in his temple and he locks it under key deep underground. And 2. He's a really terrible mentor who decides to push away the thought that something terrible is going to happen by just thinking, nah, I'm sure nothing bad is going to happen here. Master Yi's first disciples were all massacred during the Noxus-Ionian War. He starts training new disciples, who I'm not going to go too into because we'll see why later, but for now, June the Prodigy is his greatest disciple. To read her art, at his signal, June unleashed a series of blows as precise as any Yi would have made himself. Though he definitely avoided the attack, he bowed before her, pride in his smile. So Master Yi is training this new disciple in the ways of his Wuju fighting style or meditation or whatever you want to call it, and she is actually really powerful at it. At the same time, Kayn and Rost, whoever you think is more powerful or in control here, start attracting a group of followers, the cultists, and they discover that there's this Darkin weapon hidden beneath Mistfall. Rost thinks that by eating the weapon beneath it, he'll grow more powerful, because let's be honest, Rost is kind of the runty Darkin, he's not very powerful. Kayn thinks, by being tricked by Rost, that if he goes and finds this Darkin weapon, he'll be able to overpower Rost. Kayn and his cultists both invade the Ionian temple, Mistfall, and they start slaughtering all of Master Yi's followers, which, by the way, makes the second time that Master Yi's followers get massacred. At either rate, Kayn and Rost, thinking they're both outsmarting each other, proceed to start killing through everyone. At this part, it starts getting a little complicated, because obviously Kayn isn't allowed to go into Rost or Shadow Kayn, because if he does that, it kills the other character, and the lore writers don't want to really kill off the other character. However, the way they've written things is extremely ambiguous, and I'm going to try to give you guys my interpretation of the events, but it's not perfect, and you know, you just gotta go with me. Likely due to the proximity of Xolaani and her suppressing Rost's power, Rost seems to have been overwhelmed by Kayn, who then manages to wield the true power of the Darkin. Remember that in this situation, Rost wouldn't be dead, but rather suppressed. At either rate, Shadow Kayn and Master Yi engage in a duel, and June in the background sees this and starts to grow a little bit hopeless over the situation, seeing everyone dead and now seeing Master Yi potentially being beaten. Seeing the fight from Master Yi's perspective, in his art he seems to very much be faring a bit better here. His art was released after Kayn's art. To read the card, from the corner of his eye, Yi saw the flash of steel and heard the unmistakable thud of a lifeless body. Could it have been her? How could he have failed his pupils so utterly? They were untrained and unprepared, but he was the master of Wuju, and neither shame nor shadow would win the day. The could it have been her, I believe, is actually not referring to Xun, but rather to Xolaani. Master Yi must have at some point realized that Xolaani is going to be waking up. As for the last part of the quote, neither Shame nor Shadow would win the day. I believe Shadow refers to, shockingly, Shadow Kayn, and I believe here Master Yi would actually have pulled out the win here. Although Rost is a Darkin and is strong for being a Darkin, he's also not exactly the best Darkin, and I believe Master Yi would actually have pulled out the win in this one in a long fight. As the fighting raged on, June, desperate and badly wounded, turned to the voice whispering in her thoughts. "You will never die," it said, soft as summer rain, "because I will never let you." Remember that part, because it shows just how evil Xolaani is. Angry tears streamed down June's face as she surveyed the bodies littering the ground. She had failed them, she had failed her master, and now only one choice remained. As she took hold of the weapons, her humanity fled, and in its place, a hateful essence filled the emptying vassal that was once the student June. It washed through her, over her, around her, and out into the world, stirring the slumbering Darkin. So what happens to Shadow Kayn and Master Yi's duel once Xolaani awakens? I don't know, and nobody knows, because it hasn't been mentioned so far. The greatest assumption I have from here is that both of them flee, both of them realizing that Xolaani is awakened and might be too powerful, but as mentioned later, Xolaani isn't really that physically powerful. Perhaps controlling June makes her more powerful. Otherwise, they're not mentioned. They could fight each other to exhaustion and flee like this is an episode of Dragon Ball Z. We don't really know, so from here on out, these two aren't mentioned and they're just gone. Just to be clear, the other theory here, and why I'm working with the temporary Shadow Kayn theory, the other theory that makes this plot work is that Kayn enters the temple and kills a bunch of people, then Xolaani awakens, and then Master Yi, having done absolutely nothing, walks away, and then Kayn and Rost also walk away, which feels lame, and that's why I choose not to go with that theory, because it's a lame theory. Xolaani is now resurrected, in control of a body that knows Wuju magic. This makes her pretty powerful. Pictured at her feet are even more dead Master Yi followers. This makes the second time that Master Yi has lost his followers. Honestly, Master Yi kinda needs to protect his people more. Master Yi, you're a very bad master. Pictured on this card's text is Shurima's Ascended were doomed the moment they took up arms against the Void. This was an enemy that could never be beaten, and while the God Warriors were all but guaranteed immortality, their minds were never as resilient. Madness consumed them all. Xolaani, once a beloved and gifted healer, began using her hemomantic powers to control her brethren, and soon enough the hatred between her and Aatrox boiled over into civil war. Showing a bit more of her power now and why she's actually so, well, powerful is the fact that she can use her complete mastery over healing to now become a mastery over blood magic, which allows her to take control over the other Darkin. Aatrox, obviously not liking this, led effectively, I'm going to call the anti-Xolaani side of the war, and the two of them fought until the Targonians took them both out. A Darkin that controls other Darkin is actually extremely powerful, obviously, and is why this has become such a big event that Xolaani is back. At this point, Xolaani returns to her blood altar. Repeated here on the card Heedless Resurrection is, "You'll never die, because I'll never let you." Originally a promise of power to June, it's now a threat, a curse. June will never die, because Xolaani will never let her. Xolaani is now in complete control over her body, and June can do nothing but watch from here on out. The altar throbbed with life once more, shaking the sands around it with a slow and steady beat. Each of Xolaani's disciples felt the same beat in their heart. Every muscle, every thought, every moment, they were all hers to control. Long did these devoted few tend to their lady's temples. Long did they sweep back the sands and expel would-be desecrators. Long did they pray for her return, her kindness, her control. Unfortunately for Kayn, his use in this story seems to have mostly been to show just how powerful Xolaani is. Kayn had a cult that was drawn to him, but Xolaani's cult is just massive and has been around for a very long time. In addition, Xolaani seems to be able to control other Darkin, which again is a very powerful that someone can do. So who are the Darkin now? Who has been introduced into the lore? Well, let's start going through them now. The Darkin HALBERD. Straining against the confines of his cell, Tarosh heard the general's call. He would answer it one way or another. Who is a general? Aatrox. I mean, I think we can all agree on that. I mean, it's pretty obvious. Legend says that Terash was mere moments from destroying Xolaani when the Darkin were set upon by the Targonians. As centuries passed, he sensed the land around him become corrupted, tainted with rot and perpetual stench of death. How he dreamt of steeping Xolaani in the same suffering once he'd claimed his freedom.
Speak my truth, Tarosh.
Peace through servitude. I must stop you.
Hush, my child. Be at peace.
Unfortunately for Terash, he heard his general's call, woke up and went to fight Xolaani, and was promptly taken over by Xolaani. This shows that someone who actually in the past was able to beat Xolaani now can't beat her and has actually been taken over. This means that potentially Xolaani is even stronger than she was in the past. The question now is, who actually told Aatrox things were going on? Who did that at all? Who could do that? You forgot, didn't you? You forgot when I mentioned Bard. Let's read through Bard's lore for a second, just so that you guys can understand where I'm coming from. A traveler from beyond the stars, Bard is an agent of serendipity who fights to maintain a balance where life can endure the indifference of chaos. Many Runeterrans sing songs that ponder his extraordinary nature, yet they all agree that the cosmic vagabond is drawn to artifacts of great magical power. Surrounded by a jubilant choir of helpful spirit meeps, it is impossible to mistake his actions as malevolent, as Bard always serves the greater good in his own odd way. So Bard fights to maintain balance, he is drawn to artifacts of great magical power, and he always serves the greater good in his own odd way. While this is a fan theory and this hasn't been confirmed by Riot, the fact that Xolaani is seen in Bard's portal and Bard is looking at it leads me to believe that Bard actually told Aatrox what was going on, and Aatrox then put out the call as a sort of, oh shit guys, Xolaani's back, Civil War Part 2, let's go. So I think in his own odd way, Bard is sort of doing a let's fight King Kong with Godzilla. The Darkin Ballista comes from Noxus. I'm not going to spend much time here or read it because I'm going to be honest, it's kind of lame. Ancient muscles flexed once more. The warrior heard her general's call and knew where she was needed, south, in the lands she once knew as Acathia. The fact that all the Darkin are going to Acathia to fight Xolaani leads me to believe that this event is going to lead into a Void expansion after this. Like, we'll be dealing with the Darkin now, and then we'll lead into the Void later. That's my personal opinion on where this is going to lead. Remember that the Void was originally summoned in Acathia, and that's where all the Darkin fought them, just so you know. Steer clear of the Strait of Duray, where the waters whisper and the winds betray, where sea beast and bird so seldom foray, for fear of the darkness deep beneath the straits of Duray. Bilgewater rhyme. The Darkin harpoon. Varus, the champion of the dunes, lifted himself through the water, his blood coursed with the same familiar yearning from years before. To serve, to obey, to submit. So Varus has likely been taken over by Xolaani at some point in the past, and he also has reawakened. So it's not only Aatrox's side that's being reawakened, but actually Xolaani's side is awakening as well, and her side does seem to have some heavy hitters on it here. On the Unending Wave card we can see, though Varus's old bones moved slow, the waters that surged ahead of him moved at an almost incomprehensible speed. So he's fast and powerful. So the Darkin Harp's lore does say that the Targonians scattered the Darkin all around the world, but the thing is, a harp, a Darkin harp, that's stupid. Okay, actually STYRAATU is cool as hell and is very quickly becoming a fan favorite because biblically accurate angel Darkin thing is cool as hell. STYRAATU burst through the processing plant, furious and impatient. Her rage was known even before the tendrils of madness found their way into her mind, but now she would make them all pay. From here in this land of technology, then south, where she would wage war alongside her general once again. So one of these idiots picked up the harp and she immediately blew up and rampaged through Piltover. Yep, thank you, little rat man. STYRAATU seems to be actually an extraordinarily powerful Darkin. When you combine that with the fact that she was already an extremely angry, impatient individual before going mad from the curse of the Darkin, you can imagine that she is quite powerful and angry at everything. I wonder if they're ever going to address in the lore that she seems to have blown up quite a chunk of Piltover. I wonder if they're ever going to address that now Piltover needs to contend with the fact that there are Darkin, and they know there are Darkin, and they kind of blew up. The Darkin Lodestone. Perhaps those who imprisoned the Darkin thought that burying the legendary warrior Harazi within an orb of star metal would sufficiently dim her irascible will. But as her generals stirred, so too did Harazi, who found that even Targon's ancient protectors could be tempted by promises whispered from afar. Okay, from this we actually get more of an idea as to what's happening. A lot of the Darkin haven't really been awake, or at the very least haven't been trying to escape until the general, Aatrox, sends out his call. So we kind of get the idea that the Darkin have been around for a long time, but they haven't really been trying to escape until now. Harazi was gifted a higher perspective in the burning celestial matter that imprisoned her. She glimpsed the secrets of the cosmos and of the infinite passage of time that preceded and followed her existence. She learned so much, and yet her hatred for the coward Xolaani remained. Okay, so here we have a second Darkin who's actually beating Xolaani. You can see Xolaani being beaten here. Now, is this in the Darkin Wars? Probably. So this is before the modern day events. At either rate, we can see that Xolaani physically in actual combat does not seem to be that gifted. Her strength seems to remain the fact that she can control other Darkin, other humans, has a cult, etc. Now, how powerful is she now possessing June? We don't know. All we can say is that, yes, canonically, she's not really that strong. In a fight, that is. As a mage, incredibly powerful. Geralt, the Darkin Aegis, I'm not gonna talk too much about because a lot of his lore seems to rely on Aatrox eventually being released. You can see Aatrox in the background there actually fighting another Darkin, and I'll go into that one in a second because they're not fully released either. At either rate, Geralt is the Darkin Aegis, the shield, and his lore, it's not really fleshed out right now, so I don't know really what I can go on.
It waited in the dark, the void. It crawls in me.
So as I mentioned earlier, there very does likely seem to be a connection to the void throughout this event. Geralt seems to be one of the connections to the void. He has gone absolutely mad. He is of no use to Aatrox or really anyone else right now. And again, eventually they'll probably have some Aatrox voice lines with him or add some new voice lines or new lore. As for now, he has a large connection to the void because he's gone completely insane.
I hear them. We are surrounded. It never ends. You cannot escape.
Up last, we have Anaxa. Anaxa doesn't actually have a card for herself, she's just shown on the Unforgiving code, and earlier on Geralt's card fighting Aatrox. There's not much known about them other than they're buried in the Freljord, and now they're presumably awakened, and they have cold powers. That's really all we know, unfortunately. In a bit of random trivia, the card Seal and Steel once and for all clarifies the fallen god warriors entombed in these weapons could not be easily defeated, and so instead were contained. It clarifies once and for all, yes, the Darkin can die, they just found it a lot easier to entrap them rather than actually try to kill them. Last but not least, we have Varus, who's received a very large lore update. What if, over time, the man that became the Darkin remembered himself, prompted by the mortal voices within? What if, instead of overcoming those voices entirely, he came to believe in them? So Varus's new lore is that he's the only Darkin who's actually not totally usurped and replaced the people that he's taken over, but actually he's sort of started to work alongside with them. Remember that Varus actually has two hosts, and one of them was a mortally wounded hunter. They were in love with each other, and they tried to use the bow to overcome death by instead becoming a part of the bow. Varus kind of felt bad just eliminating them because they were two gay men in love, and he preferred having them inside of him rather than just killing them. And Because of this, he actually could take the time to start talking to them and overcome his PTSD on the Void War. Yes, actually they are coming up with the lore that, you know, maybe Darkin just needed therapy. In the card The Darkin Bow, it says Heartlight's Kai and Valmar were not the first to bear the bow and host Varus's inhuman power, but they were the first to remind him of his lost humanity. Once again, Varus saw two men in love and he kind of was just like, man, it would kind of make me a complete dick to just absorb these people, so he stopped absorbing them. And this is actually something that Aatrox has come to really hate Varus for, because he thinks Varus is becoming too human, which he is. That's his thing. He's actually restoring his humanity through having people to actually talk to. In his leveled up card, it says Varus was empowered, bolstered, reminded of who he was and what he had yet to become. He embraced the sum of his parts instead of working against them, and when they acted as one. So as of right now, how strong is Varus? We don't know. At the very least, through his art, you can see he's fighting Xolaani, and based on the fact that he's not gonna die, we can assume he at least fights off Xolaani. We can assume, much like an anime, that he's managed to fuse together the three people that he's made out of and actually become more powerful for it. As for the rest of Varus's lore, he seems to be gathering a band of people that he's promising power. You see all these archers in the back fighting along with him. That's like his cultist band. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not really sure what they're doing with this one. I'm not sure where they're going with it. I'm not sure if it will ever be clarified, but for now, I actually don't really know what's going on with that, so I can't say. He has a band of cultists that follow him that he keeps promising power, and he fights Xolaani. That's it. That's all we know. So then, just a quick TLDR recap of all of this. Master Yi had a darkened weapon below his temple. Kayn's cultists found out about it and set off to raid it. Kayn and Rost both thought that they were outsmarting the other, and then upon reaching the blood letters that they would emerge victorious over the other. Jun, outsmarting everybody, took the blood letters and became corrupted by Xolaani, and then became Xolaani, trapped forever with her soul in purgatory. Xolaani then set off across the countryside trying to raise her giga cult back up and corrupting more Darkin to her side. Someone, I assume Bard, notified Aatrox, who began calling the Horn of Gondor, summoning all the Darkin to his side. The thrilling conclusion to this saga will be soon. What happened with Master Yi and Kayn? Again, it's really not clear, and there's not really a good answer to the story, and you're not going to find a good answer, so I'm sorry if my fan theory wasn't satisfying you, but the temporary Shadow Kayn theory is basically the best we have to work with here. So, how do you think this story is gonna end? Xolaani seems basically tailored to counter Aatrox and totally counteract his brawny strength. He is totally outmatched by her ability to control his body with her total control of her blood magic. Do you think Aatrox will be able to beat Xolaani in the end, or do you think Riot is actually writing Aatrox to lose? I think we can guess that Aatrox wins in the end, but the odds seem pretty stacked against our friend Aatrox here. Come back in a month or two when this story finalizes in the next expansion and the next time of Runeterra Z.